Estate.
Tonight on the Fifth Estate. September 11th, 2001, the most scrutinized day in history.
Two of the most recognizable buildings in the city of New York have been attacked.
And then the entire top of the building just blew up.
But 8 years later, there may be more questions than ever.
I do not believe that it was 19 guys with box cutters taking orders from Osama bin Laden in some cave in Afghanistan.
An increasing number of people now believes the U.S. government was behind it. From the Twin Towers.
Now, how many of you knew on 9/11 that these towers were brought down by explosive controlled demolition?
To the Pentagon.
Nothing hit the building at the Pentagon. The damage was caused covertly from within with pre-planted explosives.
To the doomed flight, United 93.
Brave people trying to combat terrorists in the cockpit. This is all the stuff, really, of a Hollywood blockbuster.
This is really, really a problem for the official story. We've pulled the rug out from under the official story, and by...
Hello, I'm Bob McEwen. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. The skyline of New York City is very different today from September the 11th, 2001. And public opinion here is very different too. In the immediate aftermath of those terrible events on 9/11, the majority of Americans believed their government and the official story, that 19 hijackers funded and trained by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were responsible. That was then. Incredibly, public opinion polls now show that the majority of Americans believe the Bush administration had advanced knowledge of those attacks and in one way or another allowed them to happen. And polls show that 1 Canadian in 3 believes that too. Tonight, call it conspiracy theory or the search for truth, we're going to ask, why is this happening? What are the unanswered questions and unresolved issues that have allowed these alternative 9/11 theories to thrive? Because one thing is certain, the people who believe them aren't going away anytime soon. It is the 8th anniversary of September 11th, and at Ground Zero, New York firefighters gather to remember more than 300 colleagues who perished. Every year, they come to ensure that what happened here won't be forgotten. The worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. At that very moment, there's another gathering in Lower Manhattan to mark 9/11. Not to keep its history alive, but to demand the truth about what these people believe really happened that morning. The truth they maintain the U.S. government has kept hidden ever since. They call themselves the 9/11 Truth Movement. Truthers, some call them.
Please give a warm We Are Change welcome to Mr. Richard Gage, AIA!
Their guest of honor tonight is the man who's become one of the leaders of the movement, Richard Gage.
What? Thank you.
He doesn't look like an anti-establishment lightning rod. In fact, for 20 years, Gage was a mild-mannered architect in San Francisco who bought into the official story.
Now, here I was looking at an explosion of the World Trade Center Twin Towers in the morning of 9/11, and the experts are telling me this is a gravitational collapse due to structural weakening by fire.
What did I know? I had never seen a building come down like this before, these Twin Towers. It's a very explosive event, as it turns out. But in retrospect, I didn't know what a high-rise gravitational collapse looked like, because there had never been one.
Then, 5 years after 9/11, Gage heard something on the car radio that would change his life.
This is Guns and Butter.
It is not difficult to see that the official account of the World Trade Center cannot be true.
It was David Ray Griffin, who's been called the guru of the 9/11 truth movement.
Steel frame high-rise buildings have never collapsed, except when they have been brought down by explosives in the process known as controlled demolition.
It was like I was hit by a 2x4 3.5 years ago. I could not believe that here's this set of evidence which is so clear to me and to so many people, but that the large majority, the vast majority of architects and engineers were completely unaware of it, not having seen it on mainstream media. It's as if there's a curtain drawn over the story of the evidence of 9/11 and the destruction of these 3 World Trade Center high-rise collapses.
He quit being an architect and has become a full-time proselytizer of the 9/11 truth movement.
Jonathan Kay of the National Post is writing a book on 9/11 truth, including Richard Gage.
He's proud of standing up for what he regards as the truth. And people call him a conspiracy theorist, but it doesn't matter to him. He really believes he's fighting for the truth, and if people in his industry mock him, it doesn't bother him.
Please put your hands together and welcome San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, AIA.
Another day, another chance to spread the word, building the case that for reasons of physics and structural engineering, destruction of the Twin Towers must have been intentionally done, not with planes, but explosives.
This particular project has proven to be one of the most difficult, and not difficult in terms of reaching conclusions, however, but difficult in terms of the implications of those conclusions.
For Gage, Exhibit A is how those buildings fell. United Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower at the 78th story and above. It is 56 minutes later. Watch as the floors at the impact point begin to crumble and pitch forward. Then, with the rest of the building, they plummet more or less straight down at up to free fall speeds. In other words, with little resistance whatsoever from below. It all takes just 9 seconds.
The only way that a building can fall for 100 feet of its fall at free fall acceleration in the first 2¼ seconds is to have those columns removed and all at once. There's nothing driving the rest of the building down after that upper section has destroyed itself. It's tearing itself apart at free fall acceleration, and the concrete and the gypsum board in this building, almost all of it, is being pulverized in midair to talcum powder almost.
About half an hour after the South Tower fell, the North Tower suddenly collapsed as well. It too seemingly imploding onto its own footprint in about 11 seconds. Again, not much slower than free fall. Richard Gage insists there's only one plausible explanation for the speed, symmetry, and totality of the collapses. Explosives detonating floor by floor, horizontally expelling squibs of debris.
It's the building tearing itself apart at free fall acceleration, nearly hurling 20-ton perimeter wall units to 600 feet away. The only way those can be landed at 600 feet away is to be expelled with instant acceleration out of the side of the Twin Towers at 50 to 70 miles per hour. What force can create that?
According to Richard Gage, there's no doubt what it all means.
9/11 did not happen the way we have been told it happened.
After the break, 9/11 truthers set their sights beyond the World Trade Center.
This drama in the skies has gone on for almost 2 hours, and there's no U.S. Air Force. I said, this is impossible. That is when the penny dropped for me.
And others are taking aim at them.
The entire CIA, U.S. military, the entire journalistic establishment, hundreds of thousands of people would be keeping the secret today. How credible is that?
September 11th, 2001 began as just another day for American aviation. At any one time, about 5,000 aircraft aloft somewhere over the U.S. That morning, just before 8 o'clock, the 4 ill-fated 9/11 jetliners began to take off. American Airlines Flight 11 and United 175 departed from Boston. United 93 from Newark. American 77 from Dulles Airport outside Washington. All tracked on radar by the Federal Aviation Administration's air traffic control. It seems reasonable to believe that the skies from Washington, D.C. to New York City are among the best defended airspace in the entire United States, if not well beyond. From the White House to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland and Langley in Virginia is just a couple of minutes flying time, with F-18 and F-16 fighter squadrons standing by, presumably in combat readiness. So the question is, why, on the morning of September the 11th, 2001, were none of those jet fighters in the sky over Washington and New York? For air traffic control, it all started to unfold at 14 minutes past 8 a.m. when American Flight 11 ignored an order to change altitude. Radio contact was lost, then the transponder signal. Flight 11 was off course, heading for New York. At 8:25, the controller reported hearing what he thought was the voice of a hijacker.
American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything is okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane.
In a suspected emergency, the FAA is to contact the U.S. military, but recordings of radio communications on 9/11 show that didn't happen until just 8 minutes before American Flight 11 smashed into the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Too late to get jet fighters in the air to stop.
Oh, it's just so out of the ordinary that it's completely implausible.
One of the most prolific critics of the official story, David Ray Griffin, has written several books analyzing the events of 9/11.
But let's say, for sake of argument, maybe they goofed up on the first one. The second one, after one World Trade Center building's already been hit, they're not going to be paying attention to Flight 175?
After the first crash, 2 F-15 fighters were scrambled from Massachusetts, airborne at 8:53 a.m., just as air traffic control was trying to contact United Flight 175, also off course, also bearing down on New York. But controllers didn't inform the military about that second suspected hijacking until 10 minutes later, 9:03, just as United 175 tore into the upper floors of the South Tower. Those F-15s were still in a holding pattern, awaiting orders, about 180 kilometers away.
They could have shot it out of the air. And particularly, if you've had one hijacked aircraft, apparently hijacked aircraft, crashing into a building, which could kill thousands of people. Sure, you would kill a few hundred people in a plane to bring it down, to prevent it from doing another attack. And absolutely, there was plenty of time they could have done that.
But again, it didn't happen. On 9/11, Barry Zwicker was a media commentator in Toronto, watching the carnage unfold on TV and wondering where the jet fighters were.
And so I'm saying, come on, U.S. Air Force. And I'm getting more and more agitated. And my wife says, for God's sake, calm down. And I say, wait a minute, this is impossible. This drama in the skies has gone on for almost 2 hours, and there's no U.S. Air Force. I said, this is impossible. That is when the penny dropped for me. So then
Today, Zwicker is the point man for 9/11 Truth in Canada.
You're looking at the face of a crime of mass murder and treachery, which is an unopposed military operation. So the outsiders don't know about it, and the insiders have all sorts of resources to carry it out.
They kept saying, how come no one's looking into this? How come no one's answering these questions? How come no one's investigating this? So we did.
But we're going to keep him in the shot.
James Meggs is the editor-in-chief of Popular Mechanics, which for over a century has explained how things work, but nothing more daunting than 9/11, and questions like, where was the Air Force?
It is hard for
mere layman to understand how the biggest, most extensive military in the world could not have got fighters in the air that morning faster than it did.
You know, it's really interesting. The conspiracy theorists, one of the very common mistakes they make is what I call the myth of hypercompetence. They've seen too many movies. They have this idea that the minute a plane goes off course, 3, fighter jets are scrambled on its tail within seconds. It doesn't actually work that way. They're assuming that the air defenses were competent to fight this kind of threat. They weren't. They should have been better prepared for it. They should have thought about it. They should have trained for it.
But they do train for it. That's all they train for.
Not for planes originating inside the U.S. The air defense system was set up for outside threats, planes or missiles or other things coming in from overseas.
Truthers believe it was all done to trigger invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and that popular mechanics was part of it.
55 below. Before our report was even out, we began to get threats, and people began to jump to the conclusion that we were part of some giant conspiracy. And within hours of the magazine hitting the streets, there were articles posted on all kinds of alternative websites, basically accusing us of being in the CIA and all these things. And the people who are asking those questions are imagining some kind of government conspiracy that would involve the entire staffs of a half-dozen airports, the entire CIA, U.S. military, the entire journalistic establishment. Hundreds of thousands of people would be keeping this secret today. How credible is that?
We've been ambushed, pushed to the edge.
Every September 11th since 2001, the Truth Movement descends on New York City.
Stops turning, never trust a bush unless it's burning.
To share the latest intelligence and bolster morale.
Like I always say, if you cannot make a change, then support those people exposing the lies and exposing the liars.
On the American TV drama Rescue Me, actor Daniel Sunjata plays a New York firefighter, convinced the government was behind 9/11.
It's disrespectful to the memories.
No, dumbass. What's disrespectful is swallowing that spoon-fed Kool-Aid that's parading as the official account of 9/11 hook, line, and sinker. Like 99.9% of the people in this goddamn country. I am honoring the memories of those who were lost, okay? I'm honoring my brothers. My brothers by asking questions.
Sunjata says it was only while researching his role that he became a 9/11 truth activist.
Where the cognitive dissonance comes from people who just can't even entertain the possibility that that depth of betrayal, that their government, that their own government, not the entire government, but a criminal faction within it, could have been responsible for murdering American civilians in order to advance a geostrategic agenda.
And Craig Ranke has come from California to present findings about what he says really caused the death and destruction at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11.
The independent eyewitnesses on the scene saw what happened, and since there's no released live footage of the Pentagon attack, they're the only ones who know what really happened on that day.
Questions remain because for all the security cameras trained on American Defense Headquarters, the visual record of the 9/11 attack is virtually non-existent. The Pentagon has only released a few frames of video, grainy and hard to make out, until the explosion.
The eyewitnesses all illustrated these flight paths, and this is a
Ranke argues that given eyewitness testimony about the path of the plane's approach, it's impossible for American Flight 77 to have hit the Pentagon at all.
We feel the best working hypothesis, and in fact the only logical alternative and choice here, is that the damage was caused covertly and implemented covertly from within with pre-planted explosives.
So many conspiracy theories, so little time. When we come back, one of the most intriguing theories.
I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane.
That all the phone calls from the planes that morning were false.
I love you. Bye.
I have to say, I'm sorry, but that call was fake too.
South of the border, it's a kind of national pastime, searching for conspiracy behind seminal events. Was JFK assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald or the CIA?
That's one small step for man.
Was the moon landing really a hoax recorded on a Hollywood soundstage? And now the latest in that lineage, the 9/11 Truth Movement. Author and journalist Jonathan Kay.
This is part of the culture of Americans, that our populism in the late 19th century. There's a great tradition within America of ordinary courageous heroes rising up and speaking truth to power against the elites who control society, whether they're British or whether they're Masons or whether they're bankers.
Others see truthers as products of the divisive Bush era in the White House.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
At the hearings of the 9/11 Commission, senior counsel John Farmer established the timeline that day. He says by misleading the public to hide incompetence on September 11th, the U.S. government unwittingly triggered the truth movement.
I tell you where I have a degree of empathy, and that is, I think when you have a situation as we had here, where the official government version of what happened doesn't square with reality and leaves people scratching their heads, then people's minds run crazy, and to varying degrees. And I think that's what you have with these some of these more grand theories that somehow they snuck into the Trade Center and planted explosives on different floors. There's absolutely nothing to support that.
We started with this myth about ourselves that we were the exceptional nation. Other nations, the rulers lied and cheated and robbed their people and did all sorts, but not in America. We were the exception.
David Ray Griffin was best known as a theologian until he started to study 9/11.
So I'm very much a Johnny-come-lately to the 9/11 truth movement.
He says it's understandable that 9/11 truth has become so very controversial.
If you say that our own leaders not only lied to us, but they actually orchestrated the attacks. So this means it's mass murder on their part. It means it's treason on their part. That's the most serious crime in the modern world, is treason, because our basic religion is nationalism.
Recently named one of 50 influential people in the world by Britain's New Statesman magazine, Griffin is devoted to debunking the official story, like the phone calls on 9/11, reportedly made by passengers and crew from airliners about to crash.
This is Flight 11.
For example, this one from American flight attendant Betty On.
The cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mace that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
There were about 15 calls from the 4 planes total that were said to be cell phone calls. And many of the calls that were most important for getting the story in the public mind about these hijackers on the planes were said to be cell phone calls.
But Griffin maintains that cell phone calls from passenger jets are effectively impossible, pointing to the work of a Canadian, Guy Dudney, Professor Emeritus of Computer Science at the University of Western Ontario. Dudney's experiments have attracted international attention here on Japanese TV, as well as on the internet.
A, no service on B, no service on C.
He found that in large passenger jets like 757s and 767s, cell connections went from bad to worse.
Usually, by the time you've climbed out to 1,000 feet, you've lost your service signal. That's in a heavy commercial passenger aircraft. So that is the result of far more metal, especially steel in the engines, cutting back the signal and making it impossible. So when that thing gets up to 30,000, I just say, forget it. It can't happen.
And there's general agreement on that. Professor Dudney insists the only conclusion is that the reported 9/11 cell phone calls were faked. And if that's true, he says, it's logical that even the calls from seatback airphones, which do work at altitude, were falsified too.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please.
One of the calls, Cece Lyle saying goodbye to her husband before United 93 crashed in Pennsylvania.
I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm.
350.
There are also recordings of chaos in the cockpit as controllers desperately try to reach United 93.
Negative contact. We're looking. We're just answering your call. We did hear that yelling too. Okay, thank you.
And confusion as the plane disappears from radar.
There is now on United 93. There is a report of black smoke in the last position I gave you, 15 miles south of Johnstown.
From the airplane or from the ground?
They're speculating it's from the aircraft. Who hit the ground. That's what they're speculating. That's speculation only.
Dudney insists it was all concocted by U.S. intelligence to sell the public on hijackings that didn't exist.
From these calls and these calls alone, we have confirmation, quote unquote, that Arab terrorists wearing red bandanas and shouting religious slogans had taken over the aircraft.
You can hear voices that it would certainly appear to be fearful, angry.
Right. That's right. It's very easy, of course, to fake a radio message. I can make a radio transmission from anywhere with any kind of sound backdrop, sounds of scuffling. We have control of the plane.
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby.
But what about emotional messages like that from Cece Lyles on United 93, which her husband has said was unquestionably her?
I love you. Bye. End of message.
It's a terrific story. It's wonderful, and it helps to carry the claim that in fact that plane was hijacked, actually by Arab hijackers. But sure, well, I have to say I'm sorry, but that call was fake too.
How do you know that?
I don't. It has to be though.
Why does it have to be?
Because the other calls were impossible.
Professor Dewdney believes that all of those calls were the product of a sophisticated intelligence gathering operation, targeting passengers, learning personal information about them, then writing scripts to be read by actors through voice replicating computers. But even with the best voice morphing technology, how could actors be expected to know the pet names or intimate expressions necessary to convince friends and family they were actually speaking with their loved ones? That kind of personal communication is something that an actor, even one working for the best intelligence agency, couldn't know.
And they do screw up, and one of them did, calling his mother. Bob Brigham called his mother. He says, "Hello, Mother, this is Bob Brigham."
Actually, it wasn't Bob Brigham, it was Mark Bingham.
Dewdney is referring to a passenger on United Flight 93, Mark Bingham, whose mother said he called her and described the hijacking.
Mark Bingham, whatever, yeah, right, that's right. "Hello, Mother, this is Mark Bingham." Oh, okay. Now, does he usually say that to his mother? Probably not.
According to Dewdney, it was a slip-up and clear proof the call wasn't from her son.
Have you been in touch with his mother?
No.
Her name is Alice Hoagland, and she says, in fact, that was one of the things that they would do on the phone. Just kidding. Because he was the up-and-coming young businessman.
Yeah,
and when he called her, she says, that's the way he sometimes introduced himself.
Well, then that just means that they've done a better job.
But here, too, there are unanswered questions. For instance, what's perhaps the most famous call that day? From television commentator Barbara Olson on board American Flight 77, headed to the Pentagon, to her husband Ted Olson, then Solicitor General of the U.S.
He told CNN that she had called him that morning from Flight 77, called him twice, talked to him for about a minute each time. He was uncertain whether it was cell phone or seatback phone. He went back and forth. But he said she reported that there were hijackers on the planes, and they were armed with knives and box cutters. The only reported call that mentioned box cutters. So that shows you how important these calls from Barbara Olson were, because everybody knows the hijackers had box cutters.
But that's another of those unresolved issues. Ted Olson told the FBI his wife phoned twice that morning, calls lasting about a minute apiece. But in a 9/11 court case, FBI evidence was that Barbara Olson attempted just one phone call from Flight 77, which lasted 0 seconds.
You've only got two choices. Either Ted Olson was duped by fake calls, or he just made it up. He lied. Either way, the official story is based on a lie. And thus far, we have been unable to get a single newspaper or magazine or TV station in the United States to report this, which the FBI reported in 2006.
So assume all of those alternative theories are true. The World Trade Center towers were brought down by controlled demolition. The Pentagon was hit not by a plane, but a missile or a bomb. United Airlines Flight 93 was shot down by the U.S. military. What would all of that really mean? How many people did it all involve? And how could such a necessarily vast conspiracy be kept secret for so long? There are questions the truth movement, finds much more difficult to answer.
Critics complain that for all the heat and light the truthers generate, there aren't many alternative scenarios to challenge the official story.
But they don't feel that that's their job. They feel their job is to show everybody that the official theory of 9/11 is wrong, and then when everybody's convinced, then the population will rise up and demand a new investigation with government resources, and that investigation will tell us what actually happened.
But Professor Key Dudney at Western has connected the dots, putting together what he presents as a workable timeline to explain what really happened on 9/11.
Let me just paraphrase the feasibility scenario that you put out there.
Yeah.
That those 4 jetliners took off that morning, that they were then ordered down into a military facility,
Possibly.
that 2 other jetliners painted to look like United or American Airlines went back out, reassumed the American 11 and United 175 flight paths and hit the Twin Towers.
Basically, yeah.
And
those are remote control.
The passengers and crew were put on United Airlines Flight 93, which then intentionally crashed into Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all the witnesses. And a cruise missile of some sort, or a fighter aircraft, hit the Pentagon.
And they said,
afterwards, Dudney suggests the 3 remaining original airliners were flown into the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, I think that much as you have sketched that is a standard, take on what may have happened. Feasible? Sure, why not? Tell me an objection.
Crazy, tell me an objection.
When we return, what the truth movement calls the Achilles heel of the official story, World Trade Center Building 7.
You didn't have any airplanes. You didn't have that impact to destabilize the building.
And why all of this matters.
It's larger than any danger right now of other terrorists doing something to my family, is this pervasiveness of this misinformation that has now traveled to parts of the world that aren't crazy about us to begin with.
By mid-morning on September 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers had been reduced to tragic piles of steel and dust. Across the plaza, World Trade Center Building Number 7 was still standing, 47 stories tall. But not for long. That afternoon, at 20 minutes past 5 o'clock, Building 7 also disintegrated before our eyes, though it had not been ravaged by a passenger jet.
For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Ever since, it's been the mantra of the 9/11 truth movement.
I'm not kidding you. Building 7 is the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history.
Richard Gage, founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, says that couldn't happen simply because of the fires that raged for several hours in Building 7, caused by falling debris from the Twin Towers.
A 47-story skyscraper. It's converted all of its gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy. Therefore, it can't crush the 40,000 tons of structural steel that's holding it up and fall at free fall speed, meaning those columns had to have been removed and could only have been removed explosively.
As soon as the first building collapsed, I knew right away that that had nothing to do. There was nothing about that struck me as explosives could be involved.
Brent Blanchard is an internationally recognized demolitions expert, hired to work at Ground Zero in the aftermath of 9/11.
A lot of folks just generally saw a building falling straight down. Right from the beginning, it didn't look like that to me, and it didn't look like that to my people, because as the structure falls, giant sections are legging out off to the sides. It did not fall into its footprint. It did not fall at free fall speed. It did what something does when it's weakened to that level. This is Building 6. This is the Customs House. Building 7 would have sat right over here, and the North Tower would have been sitting right over here.
Blanchard says it's obvious to him the collapses began on the floors where the planes struck the towers. He argues that planting explosives there beforehand would have been useless. Afterwards, impossible.
If they had been placed there beforehand, they would have been blown out or affected by the plane's impact. And I don't see how they could have been placed there after, with the tremendous heat and the fires.
But what about the so-called squibs of smoke and debris the truthers insist are proof of explosives?
None of those things happened before that collapse. That collapse begins, then you start seeing other things happen, whether it's air pushing out, whether it's other types of things that are happening as the building's falling. I don't know. I wasn't in the structure at the time. It would be conjecture. There's no evidence pointing to anything else. That's the visual evidence, and that's all the evidence we have to go on.
Flowing like lava, the first responders said.
Richard Gage maintains there is evidence of something else, discovered in the pulverized concrete of the destroyed Twin Towers. Microscopic globules of molten iron. Why would that be important?
These tiny microspheres have in them the chemical evidence of thermite, iron oxide, aluminum, manganese, many of them sulfur. So this is clear evidence because this is an incendiary that becomes explosive.
The thermite Richard Gage refers to is a combination of aluminum powder and metal oxide that can generate vast amounts of heat when ignited. Gage insists the presence of thermite at the World Trade Center site can mean only one thing, that it was used to sever the columns in Towers 1, 2, and 7 as part of a controlled demolition. Yet the federal government agency responsible for analyzing the collapse of those buildings admits it never even tested for thermite.
Now, according to Gage, in the Trade Center dust, they've also found residue of nanothermite, a kind of super thermite. Perfect, he says, for covert implosions.
Well, if you were trying to perform a deceptive controlled demolition, you wouldn't use traditional high-energy explosives like C4 and RDX, which have loud bangs and bright flashes. Super thermite does not have the loud bang and the bright flashes that these normal explosives do for explosive controlled demolition.
Brent Blanchard admits he's not a thermite expert, but one thing he knows well is that preparing a skyscraper for implosion takes much time and many people to expose the supporting beams, weaken them floor by floor, then place the explosives. It's estimated as much as 100 tons of thermite would be necessary.
My issue with it is still, how do you get to the exposed columns? How do you apply enough thermite to enough columns to have it work? How are you still cutting these beams? How are you still cutting hundreds of them in order, which is what was required to make the building collapse?
But to Blanchard, the best argument may be these seismographs for New York City on 9/11.
Taken the morning of September 11th. This is a waveform showing ground vibration as it was recorded at the Ground Zero site on September 11th. This particular piece is the North Tower collapsing. And what you're looking at is actual ground vibration of the collapse transferring through the beams into the ground and being recorded. It is actually showing you that gradation.
And if this had been a controlled demolition, how would it be different?
If there had been any catalyst, you'd see another spike out here. There'd be a spike right in here, and that spike would be the actual catalyst defeating the beams.
The explosion.
Some type of explosion, right.
But for the Twin Towers and building number 7, he says, seismographs show nothing of the kind.
Very much the same thing.
Many of these issues could have been addressed, even resolved, by the 9/11 Commission, the independent body tasked with providing the fullest possible accounting of the events surrounding 9/11. But in its final report, the Commission effectively dismisses the subject of explosives in the Twin Towers, leaving it for other federal agencies to examine. As for World Trade Center building number 7, it simply ignores that altogether.
After a 3-year investigation, the report by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, found no evidence of explosives at the Twin Towers and made no mention of thermite. As for building number 7, NIST says uncontrolled fires on multiple floors caused the failure of a critical support column, then a progressive collapse.
Your dismissal of that is that it couldn't have happened in the uniform way that would be necessary for the building to fall the way it did.
Correct. The rest of the columns could not have been destroyed sequentially so fast to bring this building straight down into its own footprint. Like a house of cards, all the structural members, or most of them, had to have been cut in order for a 47-story building to collapse into a pile 4-5 stories high.
It's at the heart of this fundamental disagreement about the most crucial day in modern American history.
Well, 3.5 years ago, virtually everyone I talked to thought I was nuts. Well, I would say 80 to 90%. Now it's only like 30 to 40%.
And we have given hundreds and hundreds of architects the truth.
Since 2006, through speeches and the internet, Richard Gage has recruited about 900 architects and engineers to his cause. But some of the most troublesome questions that remain have little to do with things like structural design or physics.
If you've wired these buildings for controlled demolition, why would you need airplanes? If you got the bombs, why couldn't you have just blamed that on the Iraqis and Al-Qaeda?
Well, we have the evidence for explosive controlled demolition. You're asking me to speculate. Every time the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth speculate and veer away from the evidence, it's the speculation that's used to try an attempt to invalidate the evidence. So that's why we do not speculate as to these kinds of questions.
Again, if what you say is true, would all of this not definitively involve so many people?
Oh,
dozens,
clearly.
hundreds, thousands of people, that the odds so many years later of keeping the lid on it would be infinitesimal.
How the lid was kept on at least dozens and dozens of people being responsible for this black ops operation, which is all you can really call it, is not the purview of the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. The evidence itself warrants a real investigation which will lead to how they might have gotten away with it and who they are.
There is one thing that those on both sides of this divide can agree about, that the real importance of the fight over 9/11 Truth may have less to do with the past than it does with the future.
When I travel to Malaysia or someplace and folks there say to me, so what happened? Were those buildings really brought down by the Americans, or were they really brought down by the planes? That's when I know there's a problem. That's when I know that there are parts of this world that are now receiving this information and people are reporting it as fact over there that is really could affect how people view the West and how people view America. And I think that is the largest danger.
What's the price of not asking these questions? What's the price of just accepting what we've been told and, you know, in lockstep, just, you know, go riding it till the wheels fall off without asking these questions? You know, sometimes boils need to be lanced. Sometimes poison needs to be brought to the surface in order for real healing to take place. And for us to turn this page on history without really, really reading it properly and making sure that we have all the right answers, that's unconscionable.
Call them conspiracy theories or alternative scenarios. Find them plausible, offensive, or crazy. For now, the key question about 9/11 Truth is simply, whose version of the truth are we talking about?
A final word on that story. We did it not to promote one side or the other, but to shine some light on some of those unresolved issues and unanswered questions. And given the amount of mail we got before the program, we're fully expecting to hear from a lot of you on both sides of the 9/11 Truth issue. And we welcome all of it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The Fifth Estate is now going to step aside for the CBC's seasonal programming, but we'll be back in the new year with another round of brand new stories. So watch for us on Friday, January the 8th. Now, for everyone here at the Fifth Estate, I'm Bob McEwen. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.